Sustainable Drainage and the Flood and Water Management Act. I'm not going to dwell on this. We all know that there's been several delays, and that Defra has stated they're still fully committed to implementing it, but there's no defined timescales, and the Act did receive cross-party support, so whoever gets in next time round, hopefully SuDS will still be high on the agenda. What are the implications for us in Cambridgeshire? Well, Cambridgeshire is one of the fastest and largest growing counties in the country, with extensive development planned in and around Cambridge itself. We also have an estimated 50% of our land within the county at risk of flooding, both from Main River but mostly surface water. And we have about 60% of our county under the management of internal drainage boards. So that has an even stronger risk of flooding, and the majority of that is in permeable area as well, in terms of the clay soil, so it's less permeable in terms of SuDS. We're an upper tier local authority. We've got 5 district councils that we work with, and we've also got 63 internal drainage boards. So we're quite busy in terms of partnership working. We've also proactively recruited 2 staff members to take forward the SuDS implementation. I don't know whether other counties have done the same. So there is a risk there with budget cuts and twiddling of thumbs that we need to find work for these individuals or we lose them. So with the delays came general confusion within the county amongst the local planning authorities, the Environment Agency, ourselves and developers. And there was a significant risk to future development within the county. And as Cambridgeshire is growth, and that's something that is one of our main key drivers within the political arena, it was really important that we sort out some of these risks. So the risks we identified, SuDS features being proposed when there was no recognisable adopting body. What I mean by that is that developers obviously were working proactively within Cambridgeshire. They knew that we had exemplar sites that deliver SuDS already, and that we've got an aspiration to do more SuDS in the future. So they were factoring that into the design. And of course they came to us then with these beautiful plans with all these SuDS saying, right guys, you're going to adopt this. And we said, well actually no, we've got no legislative requirement to do that. So who does adopt it? We were then obviously under pressure in terms of who was going to take these SuDS on. And working closely with the Environment Agency, they had already downskilled in this area in anticipation of us taking on this new legislation. So they didn't have anyone to help out. So we there was a risk of this real void of nobody being able to provide guidance, maintenance, adoption, or anything to do with SuDS. And that was a risk to us within the county. We already have experience of management companies where, you know, not all developers are the same, but we have experience with some developers wanting to move on to the next development, not wanting to have to deal with the fact that there's no one to maintain the SuDS, establishing a management company, which tends to fold after 12 months, then no one is left. No one has responsibility for managing the SuDS, and there's no money to do it either. So we were really wary of going down multiple management company routes. So we felt that it was important that somebody took responsibility for the SuDS that were going to be appearing within the county. So I decided that we're just going to do it. So what we've decided to do, our approach is to gain clarity to help us deliver growth in Cambridgeshire. That was one of the political drivers. And in terms of SuDS, we initially looked at completely mirroring the process that's been suggested by Defra, which is the major developments upwards. And we felt, as an authority that was going to be taking on something completely new, working with our colleagues and our partners with other organisations, that was going to be a really big ask for us. So we said, well, let's go down the strategic route then. And then what is strategic? So when we met recently with our partners in the district councils and the Environment Agency, we kind of did a bit of a finger in the air assessment and thought, well, hang on, okay, let's look at what the implications would be in terms of future growth, because we've got lots of growth knocking on the door. let's look at 5 hectares to start with, see what implications that has for the district councils, because they're keen for us to take on some of the responsibility and help them through this process. We'll also look at 1 hectare, and we'll also look at more than 10 properties. So we look at what the workload's going to be for us, and also what the district councils would like support on. So we're doing that process at the moment. But the idea is not to tread too far away from what Defra is suggesting. That's really important, because when this is enacted, we don't want to have to do lots of backpedaling. So we are aligning ourselves with the little information that we've gleaned so far. So our approach can only be achieved through partnership working, and I would say that if you've probably already started this process. If you haven't, we felt that it was really key to get our partners on board from the onset. So for our first sort of proper meeting, we invited all the district councils, and that was just to talk about how we might mobilise to start achieving this aspiration to be a SAB. So from the very, very onset, we've involved our district council colleagues and also the Environment Agency, because they have lots of useful information, particularly around planning. We're not planning experts. We don't do planning within Cambridgeshire in terms of what we're discussing here in development. So it was critical to have them on board and for them to help shape what we're going to deliver. So we split our work stream into three key areas. One is the application, second is the adoption, and third is the maintenance. So we've got 3 pockets of work, if you like, moving forward, 3 work streams. In the absence of legislation, how do we make this stick? We've decided to go down the Memorandum of Understanding route with the district councils, where we would lay out how this process would work, what would happen if we weren't happy with the SuDS design and yet the planning authority was happy with the design of the development, and all the key processes therein in terms of how we would receive the planning applications, pre-application discussions and fees. We've already agreed that through our committee system at £55 an hour. And then also things around what the timescales would look like, who would validate the planning application, a separate SuDS application coming in. So all of this nitty-gritty would be defined within the Memorandum of Understanding between ourselves and the district councils. And the Environment Agency is obviously supporting us on that. And then in terms of embedding it within the local planning framework, we're looking at a supplementary planning document that is aligning itself with all the emerging local plans in terms of our aspirations around SuDS and water management in Cambridgeshire. And luckily, a lot of we're able to, we caught it at the right time to get this supplementary planning document worked up to reflect what was happening within the local plans. And then the process, as I've said, for applications and pre-application discussions. So the approval and adoption process, how would that work? Well, that would be defined also within the Memorandum of Understanding, and we would establish processes for approval and voluntary adoption. We're not saying that we would take everything on, we would adopt everything, but what we do want is that adoption would go to a body organisation that would remain in perpetuity. So we've got some reassurance that it would be a public body in perpetuity, so they're not going to walk away after 2 years and there'll be no way of maintaining the site. Highways, we've spoken with Highways colleagues and they've expressed an interest in supporting us with the approval and adoption phase, and then they managing the maintenance phase afterwards. So that's something that we're looking at the moment, and that's one of the options that we'll be putting in a paper to elected members later in the year. Monitoring and financial agreements for non-compliance, that's something that the district councils highlighted to us, and that's another area of work that we're working with them on, in terms of how we would set the monitoring fees. What we're looking at the moment, if we go down the Section 106 route, the costs of monitoring would be incorporated into that. If we go down the householder charging route, then the costs of monitoring would be incorporated into the plan application fee. So maintenance, this is our third work stream. So we're looking at cost collection arrangements. We don't want to take this burden on without having sufficient financial ways of getting our money back, basically. I've lost my sentence then. So we're looking at two options. One is the commuted sum, so Section 106. The biggest risk for us is that when you collect the payment for a particular development, you can only use it for that development. You can, as Gordon mentioned, you can actually accrue interest against it, and you could then look at using that interest, but it's a real legal sticking point in terms of the interest accrued for one development cannot be used to fund maintenance for another site. But there are ways and means of being able to work around that, apparently. So we are investigating that. But at the moment, if you sort of set a fee, and you can only really work to 30 years maintenance programme, so if you set that fee, you don't use all that money after 30 years, you have to give it back. You can't keep it. So we have to be really careful about how we then maintain these sites in perpetuity, hence us looking at one of the options suggested by Defra, which is the householder charge. This is something that we had shied away from initially because we don't collect money from householders. We're an upper tier local authority, and district councils would traditionally do that. For us to set this function up is going to be very expensive. We did a quick finger in the air calculation to establish the admin and the processes and procedures to collect money per household. It works out about £17 admin fee per householder per collection. So as you can imagine, when Defra is looking for us to set reasonable costs for maintenance, then we slap on £17. It doesn't look very reasonable. So what we've looked at is working with the district councils and then collecting it on our behalf, flying in the face of the don't link it to council tax. We feel that this is the most appropriate way for us, and as we're going in advance of legislation, we might just give that a go. And then the district councils would collect on our behalf, and then they would transfer that money to us with a smaller, more reasonable admin fee because they've already established the processes within their own authorities. And we've established, so far we've got a SuDS handbook which outlines all the SuDS that we would want to see on site. We've now got maintenance schedules which would show how much it costs to maintain SuDS. So then the issue we had, if you go back to the application stage, is when you get that application through, it doesn't define even how many homes you have on site and what the SuDS might look like. You tend to get a bit of a blank canvas. We're looking to put so many homes in here based on the site. What's the SuDS fee going to be for our Section 106 negotiation? And that's a real challenge for us because we go, oh, we don't know what you plan to do. You know, so we're doing some statistical analysis. We've got a fantastic graduate in who's looking at what the likely maintenance fees will be, and then they're sense checking it against what the fees are actually in sight. So we're taking a bit of an average. It sounds a bit confusing. I'm probably not explaining it clearly. But basically, you've got a site, you've kind of got a guess of how many houses you're having on that site and roughly what the maintenance fee might be. And if you do enough of that, you're going to know roughly what your maintenance fee might be and what you need to negotiate for your Section 106 when you don't have a sufficient level of information in terms of what the actual design would look like. So if we go down the Section 106 route, that information will be critical. If we go down the householder charging route, then obviously we've got more on the ground to know what the costs are going to be to us. Next steps, the timetable moving forward for us is we've already had our initial meeting with key partners. They're all very supportive and really want us to push forward with this. August, September, we're meeting with individual authorities again to go through the nitty-gritty of their sign-off process for the MOU and the SPD in terms of whether it needs to go to portfolio holder sign-off, whether it goes to committee, and factoring that into our timetable. We're going for independent committee approval to go down this route, and that will be October, although we have a committee process, so we've got spokes, and spokes will give us some direction on whether they think this is a good idea, but what we have back from elected members at the moment and portfolio holders is, yes, please do something, because growth is key for Cambridgeshire. And then October to November, we'll be consulting with key stakeholders, and we'll also be running workshops for all of our local house builders and developers to make sure that the process fits with them, because because it's in advance of legislation, we want them to be happy with what we're planning. And then 2014, finalise the process and begin implementation, all being well.